Hello, good morning, everybody. So welcome to the third day of the conference. So this is the last day. Again, also we will have full day trying to cover and involve everybody from the west coast of states until Australia. And our keynote of today is Douglas Kahn. And let me introduce him. Douglas Kahn is author of the books and histories of the sound in arts, experimental music, and computation in the arts. Like books like author of the books like Earth Sound, Earth Signal, Energies, and Earth Magnitude in the arts, and Noise, Water, Meat, a history of sound in the arts. And also he is a honorary professor at Sydney College of the Arts, University of Sydney, and Professor Emeritus at University of California at Davis and University of New South Wales. And particularly, I would like to pay attention that if we started the first day with a plenary session focusing on the green and going beyond the green. So, because this is like also the framework of the project where this PostSensorium event takes place. So that's a European Creative Europe supported cooperation larger framework called Green Revisited. So then we are very happy to go into even more prismatic ecologies, and we are hosting the Douglas Kahn with his keynote on Not Seeing Blue, Energy and Materialism in Art and Science. Okay, welcome. Douglas, please.
Thank you. I'm speaking from Darg and Gundungurra country in the Blue Mountains near Sydney, Australia. I plan to talk about Aboriginal shimmering and brilliance, and if you have any questions on that, please ask. But I've revised my topic to address the senses more directly. But first, my thanks to Rasa and to all the people at RIXC. 15 years after speaking at the important Waves Festival. I'd like to thank also Pia van Gelder for help in thinking through these ideas in the context of our paper and book collaboration, present book collaboration called The Energies Artists Say. Finally, I apologize for missing most of the session since most occurred too late for this side of the earth. So it's the sun's fault. About 20 years ago, I began a shift from the study of sound as one energy among others, and then from there to figuring out what energy might be. The energies in the book Earth Sound, Earth Signal from 2013 were outside the body: ionospheric radio, earthquakes, atom bombs. The closest I got was to my teacher's scalp. That's my teacher, Alvin Lucier. The brain waves in his music for solo performer. Energies inside the body are a different universe. Today I will get to the eye, but once again only at a scalp of sorts, only the retina, where transduction occurs between light and electrochemical signals to the brain. It's not a surface, it's a membrane. Concentrating on these sites of exchange is a tactic. Cellular surface transduction, for instance, is a doorway to metabolism. It's not the whole house. Energies are more easily located as they come out of hiding and into transformation when they step in and step out. So today I'm narrowing down energy to the body to the eye to the retina. I will also narrow down the tiny patch of visible light on the electromagnetic spectrum to blue, and then narrow that down even further to, there's going to be two blues. Now, Plato's vision involved light in a fire in the eye, reaching out to daylight where it coalesced with the sun, which was then registered in the soul. This is the extramission theory of vision. I will stick with intermission, but keep with the coalescing. Per the theme of this conference, I will look to Michel Serres and Gaston Bachelard for the interactions of thermodynamics and classical elements in terms of energy, materialism, and in the differentiation of art and science, and to posit where energy sits philosophically. The first blue will appear in about 10 minutes. I need to talk about energy per se first. Theoretically, as the philosopher Michael Martyr has said, energy is, quote, reliably unquestioned, unquote. It's truly daunting for many reasons, but its insubstantiality seems to be an obstacle. That and its constant movement and non-locality. That's why defaults to a priori concepts and definitions are so attractive. Stabilizing work, when you go to a definition, stabilizing work has already been done. In energies in the arts, I opted instead for an indefinition of energy. I've been working on methods for understanding. One that I'll use today is to amplify energy where it already exists in a conceptual framework. So take the holy trinity of matter, energy, and information. Energy has come to resemble the Holy Ghost, someone known as a major player, but not a familiar face. In the Trinity, energy is pulled upon by the gravity of a substantialist of materialism. I guess that's the body and incarnation on the one side, and swamped by the latest copy of computation and communications on the other. That is the all-knowing. Energy recedes in this Trinity. Amplification is a means to grant face-time beyond the ghosting. In physics, the first law of thermodynamics states that energy can neither be created nor destroyed within a given system. However, in cultural dynamics, energies are created and destroyed all the time, perhaps not destroyed, since in a historical sense, none of them will die. Such dynamics, cultural dynamics include, of course, thermodynamics. Since this is an art science conference, we don't have to talk about, or if you wish to talk about artistic licenses and scientific laws. In the 20th century, matter, energy, information came to occupy a place once held by the classical elements. In the last 5 years, the so-called elemental term in media theory in particular has resurrected them in the name of materiality. It is interesting to notice their interaction or avoidance, that is the interaction of the Holy Trinity and of the classical elements, or the elemental term. One key feature of the classical elements is, in this regard, is that energy loses its brand. The recession becomes even more pronounced. Things like fog and clouds hold down the mantle of insubstantiation, and energies become juice for infrastructures, like blood in a body. Fire is about the best bet. So let's ask about fire in the eye. I had a whole section of the fire in the ear, but didn't have time for that. The senses and materiality have gone hand in hand. Aristotle proposed 4 senses, not 5, not the 20 plus senses that people count now. Only 4 because he wanted to hold close to the classical elements: vision, water, sound, air, smell, fire, and touch, earth. In other words, his fire was in the nose. Blue complicates matters: blue water, blue sky, blue flame, blue rocks. One way to amplify energy is to see how it is set apart. The philosopher Michel Serres was thoroughly schooled in thermodynamics. He was not pleased with the work of his teacher, Gaston Bachelard. too many breaks and schisms. Bachelard, you'll know, is sort of equated with the epistemological break. There's actually several breakings in there. Bachelard kept his philosophy of science in modern physics of matter and energy in the New Scientific Spirit that I'll talk about soon, while he sequestered the 5 volumes on material imagination to the elements that I have listed there. Michel Serre said, "I've worked my entire life to remove that rupture, to show that one single voice can speak about the elements both scientifically and poetically. I didn't want to separate scientific minds from literary minds, the hard sciences from the social, but to bring them together. My idea was a reunion, not a separation." I was at a history and philosophy of science conference here in Australia several years ago. And there was a lot of people talking about Bachelard, and none of them had read the psychoanalysis of Fire, Water, and Dreams. And none of them had read the poetics. So it's, whereas artists often read the poetics and not the philosophy of science. Sarah said that the problem with Bachelard's new scientific spirit was that it, quote, never said a word about information theory, nor later heard the sound of Hiroshima, which in a way was accusing Bachelard of being born too early. If you take information theory to be associated with Claude Shannon, so Hiroshima and Shannon were mid-century, mid-20th century phenomena. Now, although he didn't like Bachelard's epistemological breaks of pre-science to science and within the sciences, Serre actually ascribed to a more fundamental philosophical break with his term Hiroshima. It's his metonym for nuclear armaments. He actually said that Hiroshima is on every page he writes. It represented the break due to a global self-awareness of tangible self-annihilation that was new in human history. This in turn had been made possible by a tripartite coordination, an iron triangle, as his student, Bruno Latour, called it, that joined science with industry and science, industry, and the state military. So three sides into what Serre called a thanatocracy, capable of an unprecedented death drive expansionism. So he said it was this sort of coordination, the stabilization in a triangle that gave the ability for this unprecedented expansionism, and that expansionism was characterized by a death drive. You'll see that in this triumvirate, there's no art. There's no art side of the triangle, which may not be true given Tim Lenoir's military entertainment complex. May nevertheless suggest more abstractly that destabilizing this iron triangle to free science up for art rather than a thanatocratic power is a thing to do. You can actually see artists and authors do this specifically after mid-century, like Kurt Vonnegut for one. In my method, this is where energy can be amplified in this, when Serre starts to talk about Hiroshima in Hermes in the mid-1970s. He theorized Hiroshima, and again, this is like a metonym. It stands for all nuclear armaments and things associated with it. It theorized Hiroshima as the first world object. And this world objects are an under-examined item in his vocabulary of objects, considering quasi-objects did so well in Latour's actor network theory. The second major world object for Serre, it disclosed itself in the 1980s with global warming. So you'll see similarity with Tim Morton's hyperobjects, which was posited first in 2010, 35 years later. Both world objects That is Hiroshima, and there's other world objects, but these are the two major ones. Both world objects are planetary and energetic, both with control issues. One converts mass to energy into instant incineration. The other involves a not so slow burn. In his speech 16 hours after Hiroshima, President Truman said that the US brought the sun down upon Japan, and now the sun is increasingly setting down upon the earth in global warming. In this way, energies are philosophically conditional. And I'd like to sort of emphasize the conditional part. It makes, I mean, I don't know how many people have a kind of a pragmatic, or this type of reading, or a pragmatic looking at Serre as so much an ethicist and a pragmatist, but it revolves around this idea of being philosophically conditional. It makes pragmatics and ethics it makes for pragmatics and ethics before worrying too much about ontology. Now, these objects are perceivable. Lightning, the decisive element or emblem of energy, could earlier be imagined as a natural act or a natural event or an act of the gods. But because reshaped intensities and distributions of storms and droughts, it is increasing. Each lightning bolt has increasing amounts of human in them. Not so much human, but ecopaths, as I call them, thanatocrats. Power and energy as a form of pollution. But let's start getting into blue. Bachelard's new scientific spirit, spirit, from 1934 was for many the first intellectual popularization of relativity and quantum theory, that is modern physics versus classical physics. The chapter of matter and radiation is particularly important because it is here that he focuses on the epistemological break where the study of microphysics or microenergetics, as he calls it, entails a dematerialization of materialism. We can talk about that. There's a lot of, this was the sort of the obstacle of insubstantiability that I was talking about. You'd see it in also in a different form in the Lucy Lepard's dematerialization of the arts, but it sort of plagues the whole discourse on energies. But anyway, Serre was very explicit about it in matter and radiation. While the general sort of, in the Bachelard's matter and radiation, where Serre's general assessment of Bachelard holds true, it is important to note that Bachelard exemplified this break, this sort of key break between classical and modern physics with an aesthetic and experiential question of why the sky is blue. Now, the 19th century explanation by Lord Rayleigh had appeared complete to a lot of people, that chemistries in the atmosphere's scattered wavelengths differently. The blue in sunlight being shorter wavelength than red, say tiny particles scattered blue across the sky. This was an elastic trampoline, or what he called mirror paradigm, but Bachelard warned the phenomenon of reflection may actually induce blindness. Against Lord Rayleigh, he pitted, quote, ionization studies that have explained why the sky is blue and shifted the explanatory burden from matter to radiation. So these studies were by the great Indian physicist, C.V. Raman, instead of reflection, they focused on interaction of photons and electrons and what's called the inelastic fluctuations in absorption and emission. It earned him a Nobel Prize, and it became central to materials science. It is odd that he is not more front and center with, especially within this, and he's not really not even talked about that much in terms of how central he was to the central chapter in the new scientific, spirit. Anyway, but before Raman, art, aesthetics, and experience was at the core of his work. He's an incredible. There's a whole institute with almost all of his papers up online. It's amazingly interesting. Early on, Lord Raleigh figured in prominently in a study of acoustics of an Indian monochord before he moved into light. But he was a sucker for beauty. In his 1923 paper, this is before the Raman scattering, there's a paper called Thermal Opulence in Crystals and the Color of Ice in Glaciers, where a narrow pencil of sunlight concentrated by a lens passed through a block of clear ice shows a beautiful blue opalescence. Oh, opalescence, sorry, there's a difference, opalescence. It was on a boat, in fact, sort of the legend has it that it was on a boat in the Mediterranean, seeing into the sea when he became positive that Lord Raleigh's reasoning was incomplete. He sought to explain why the sea, glaciers, and the sky were blue. In the 1920s and 30s, Raman spectrographs could take up to 20 hours to produce, whereas in the 1990s, with the use of lasers, they became effectively instantaneous. In 1994, it was shown that Raman scattering occurs in light with a frequency of 10 to the minus 8 instances. In other words, the sky is blue because of Raman scattering at about 1 part in a billion. Is this the blue we see? I don't see why not, especially in what I call experiential physics. In my chapter in Energies in the Arts, I talk about that. But say if instead of this sort of broad distribution of Raman scattering, if we could corral them all into one spot, I think the sky is big enough to notice a billionth. I don't know if it would be 1 star or a thin line or a dense blemish. Now, at the Waves Festival 15 years ago, I met Jakob Kierkegaard and became familiar with his work. His labyrinthitis engages autoacoustic emissions. Now, I was going to talk about, I was going to pit the cochlea against the retina, the ear and the eye, and sort of collide them CERN style and see what was produced. But again, I had to cut this talk down. But yeah, labyrinthitis engages autoacoustic emissions. He does so in a number of other works. Autoacoustic emissions are vibrations that are generated by the ear in the act of hearing. Hearing was not just passive, in other words, not just one-way traffic, but active. The ear produced sound in order to hear. It moved, the scientific literature moved from a model of cochlear microphonics, as they were called at mid-century, to a more recent one starting in the late 1970s, to cochlear amplification. So from a microphone to an amplifier. Now, Jakob's work prompted me to search for a correlation in the eye, in effect, whether there was a trade in absorption and emission, whether a trade in absorption and emission could be located in vision itself. If sound is emitted from the ear, does light emanate from the eye? Even looking for a correlation made vision more active. I admit there must be hundreds of sci-fi, horror, and fantasy characters that have all types of light rays, lasers, fire, and who knows what else streaming from their eyes. But for among the philosophical superheroes, look no further than Plato, called the extramission theory of vision, or extramission or emission theory of vision. More memorably, it's called the fire in the eye. Here he is in Timaeus. Such fire as has the property not of burning, but of yielding a gentle light, they contrive should become the proper body of each day. For the pure fire within us is akin to this, and they caused it to flow through their eyes, making the whole fabric of the eyeball, and especially the central part, the pupil, smooth and close in texture, so as to let nothing pass that is of coarser stuff, but only fire in this of this description to filter through the eye by itself, or filter through pure by itself. Accordingly, whenever there is daylight round about, the visceral current issues forth like to like and coalesces with it, it being daylight. And so again, we won't be buying into the to extramission, but we will be buying into coalesces. Now, Plato was a solar creature that the fire in the eye coalesced with the fire of the sun. And the sun, he said, was the cause of vision. And daylight for him was associated with the metaform within Platonic forms, the metaform of the good. So citing fire with fire was for him an action at a distance among the kindred, the like to like, a flame in the flame and the sun. Yeah, we don't have to subscribe to extramission to maintain coalescence, which could happen at any distance, any location. In fact, scholars comment on how much touch was at play. Coalescent fires, energy exchanges, transductive returns, absorption and emission have their figures in dialogue, love, commune, collective, etc. Theories of intromission won out a very long time ago, although the present day belief in extramission is still strong in children and many adults, and there's plenty of literature on this in psychology. One explanation may be that the fire is attention, or perceiving the act of perception. Oops. But Aristotle talks about the two sites, in effect, perception and the perception of perception, but they don't go out to coalesce with the sun. Although extramission might fit interestingly on the scaffolding of Alfred North Whitehead's prehension. It's not, I think it's there. It's not something I've looked into yet. Now, one of my favorite pieces of evidence was from a pre-Platonic, more of a doctor, Pythagorean, who pointed out when the eyeball was struck, it produced light. So there must be some fire inside. Now, extramission does get regularly fortified in language, piercing stare, evil eye, also desire more generally. Now, Laura Mulvey saw a male gaze projected in cinema, the structuring evil eyes of patriarchy. It is not a leap to move from perception to perspective. In fact, their definitions actually seem like the descriptions of the other. In her essay on vision and perspective, Donna Haraway saw objectivity operating similarly. She argues through the eye, instead for situated knowledge along with in an audio-visual way, along with, she talks about vision but also the nasty tones of the word objectivity heard the tones heard by feminist ears. Now, I didn't find any, once you start looking, extremissiveness, if that's a word, is everywhere, if not extramission proper. In general agreement with theories of intermission, I didn't find evidence of a physical light emanating from the eye, but I did find body glimmer, the way the entire body emits light. So there must be a few, I mean, there is a paper that talks about the few photons in the eyeball having to do with what are called ultra weak photon emissions. Masaki Kobayashi and his colleagues photographed photons emanating from several young men using a special camera cooled at 120 degrees Celsius, 1,000 times more sensitive than the naked eye, or in this case, the shirtless eye. Photos of photons taken at 3-hour intervals through the day recorded ultra weak light of photon emissions, quote, detected from the cheeks, followed by the upper neck and the forehead. And these were the product of, quote, biochemical reactions in which excited molecules are produced from bioenergetic processes. Now, UPE are often just generated spontaneously, and in this way, they're the noise floor of light in the body and occur in cells throughout the body. As such, they must occur in the human retina as well. So there is some fire in the eye. The study found differences in emissions throughout the day correlating with circadian rhythms. The circa in circadian means around, as in approximately. It has wiggle room around 24 hours. The main circadian block or clock in the body is the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Just a minute. I should have written this down. In the hypothalamus, it works in concert with the pineal gland. Now, René Descartes thought that the pineal gland was the seat of the soul. It got its name from dissectionists because it looked like a pine cone, the pineal gland. So if you're going to have microphones and amplifiers in the head, why not a pine cone? There's plenty of other articles of nature and technology in the head. Some people actually think that the brain is a computer, which is really a wild idea. Now, although circadian communications operate continually throughout the body, the clock needs to be synced, and for mammals, this occurs almost entirely through the eyes. The syncing is known as entrainment, and it is where I would place coalescence. So this is the main entrainment is where coalescence comes back. Similar to how the cochlear amplifier was not discovered until the late 70s, the discovery of the mechanism in the eye for this energy exchange was even more recent and startling. Rods and cones were the only show in town in terms of photoreceptors in the retina. But in the 1990s and early 2000s, a third light-sensitive or photoreceptor cell was discovered. Not even, so this is not even 2 decades ago that the actual cell was isolated. Now there's a sort of expansive literature on it. Now they were these cells were awkwardly named intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, or IPRGCs for short. So this is where science communications could have come in. So intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells don't float off the tongue. So about 5 years ago, I personally started calling them solar retinal cells or solar retinals. because of their main function was the sinking for the sun. Therefore, sensing in the light in the eyeball involves rods, cones, and solar retinals. They are also solar, but rods and cones won't be going anywhere soon, I don't think. Unlike rods and cones, the solar retinals are non-imaging. They send impulses up toward the Cartesian soul of the circadian, not to imaging centers in the brain, although some stuff goes to imaging centers. The diurnal frame rate is not great for cinematic day, night, the slow, unless it's a really, art exhibition, slow film. It's not great for cinematic analogies. Also, solar retinals respond to only a very thin blue light. So it's bad for color cinema. It's a very thin light. They peak at 479 nanometers. So that is blue. So we have the sky is blue, and in there is a really thin slice that is not seen. Well, I mean, it would be seen, but it's not discerned. That's the second blue. So those are the two blues. An early isolated scientific recognition was in 1923, when a few blind mice remained responsive to diurnal rhythms. But it was not until the 1990s that Russell Foster revivified the research. Now, I've got to warn you, if you get too far into this research and you like animals, this is going to be rough. It's rough reading. I was thinking that if you're a mouse, it's in a room full of scientists, it's best that they be astronomers. In 2007, an 87-year-old woman, blind her entire life, was found to be 479 sensitive to blue. You can be vision blind and not be circadian blind. Only if you have no eyes is synchronization cut into a free run. This sync is sluggish, not instantaneous. It is not just diurnal due to the Earth's rotation, but also seasonal due to the tilt of the Earth. The frame rate is of the circadian is pulsational. Solar retinals operate through the transduction of melanopsin instead of the melatonin in circadian clocking. The mela in both referred to dark or black, as in melancholia. It signals by inhibiting light. Thus, day and night courses electrochemically through the body. In this way, infinitesimal chemistries position us in the solar system. It is a locative device like a GPS, but larger than global. In fact, not so much a locational device in a situational subjectivity than a relocational device. It is not as just a passive screen of the sun, but again, a coalescence. The added bonus is that 479 blue is there amid the 1 in a billionth of Raman scattered blue. So the epistemological break in modern physics is ready for you on a clear day. If it's cloudy, you'll have to use a diffraction grating. So these positional and temporal apprehensions have all the makings of a sense. So let's call it solarception. I think the cause of its absence has to do with the recent character of the science. There is a huge scientific reference on the senses with an excellent chapter on melanopsin cells, but differing primarily to their anatomical role in the retina, but there's no discussion of a sense operating in its own right. A few people in the popular press have talked about a circadian sense as a sense of time, equating it with a sense of time, but I think that misses the point. There's more talking about circadian influences on the senses than any circadian sense itself, but the rare instances that it does, they equate it like a clockwork, which strikes me as mechanistic, placing dependence on the internal chemical clock rather than the transductive membrane and sluggish relocational coalescence with the integrity of the sun. That is integrity if you take this more than human talk seriously, more than human hyphen. And it also misses the evolutionary pocketing of the solar environment in the mammalian eye. So all we need to do is look at the existing model of the two senses in one organ, the ear. It contains hearing and balance, the gravitational tug on the otoliths. So the eye contains vision and solarception. In this way, the solarceptive equivalent of getting dizzy is jet lag. So the autonomy of the sun in this is crucial. Plato said that the sun is the cause of sight, yet vision, that is what is visible, gives this subject position too much dominion. Solarception is one way to return environmental balance to the eye, and it does so without the idealized cycles that are used to underpin contemporary philosophies before global warming dislodged the synchronization of seasons in the circadian. You don't have to buy into Plato's metaphor of the solar good to appreciate that all but 1 part in 4,000 of the energy on Earth comes from the sun, even while only a nano or pico amount of its light reaches the Earth. And this is not sun worshiping unless you wish to worship something that returns your attention much less than a billionth of a pico amount. For me, that sounds like an abusive relationship. It is not too happy at the moment. It is revanchist because the sun is revanchist because it's dead. Fossil fuels have been exhumed, its graveyard plundered, and its bodies burnt, mixing with its liveness. It has gone from environment to apex predator. Once intergenerational justice is sorted, we need to get back to the Platonic good. The extramissive trajectory from a fire in the eye best not wander far to coalesce with the sun. That is what happened to Icarus, where waxwing technology couldn't stand the heat and get past the prototype stage. So there's the theory of technology in here, just as people talk about Daedalus being associated with technology. People ignore the prequel to Ovid's myth and Metamorphoses, the one that explains why the clever and deceitful engineer Daedalus suffered the fate of losing his own son, Icarus. Icarus was a sort of a dim, self-involved bulb. He sort of reminds me of Eric Trump a little. Daedalus had murdered his fate was sealed because he murdered his precocious nephew, Perdix, P-E-R-D-I-X, the inventor who generated devices that arose from the earth and remained close. He saw a jawbone with teeth and invented the saw, for instance. Murder for Daedalus was a matter of eliminating the competition. Now, Athena sealed Daedalus's intergenerational fate by killing his only son, while turning Perdix into a partridge before he struck. Daedalus pushed him off the Acropolis before he hit the pavement. Athena changed him into a partridge, and Latin name for partridge is perdix. And partridge is a bird that flies close to the ground and not up into the sun. So it's inventions and other technology that stays close to the earth, therefore can be called a predixian technology. Now that the natotocracy is Daedalian, here's a tongue twister, in mimicking the overwhelming power of the sun in 1955. That is in the so-called hydrogen bomb thermonuclear devices, on the tail end of squandering millions of years of stored sun in 200 years. So Perdix needs to be resurrected now that Icarus has been reversed. The myth of Icarus needs to be reversed. Icarus does not fly into the sun. The sun descends onto him. His wax wings do not melt under the sun's heat, casting him into the sea where he drowns. Glaciers and polar ice caps melt and the seas rise up to engulf him where he stands. That's me quoting myself. Predixian technology doesn't fly into the sun or upturn and burrow into the earth. It flies close to the surface, a coalescence contained in the solar terrestrial environment, and a solar septuality that keeps the troposphere intact, preventing a decoalescence of triage. This is actually similar to Michael Marder championing of the superficiality of plants in the energy exchange with the sun in photosynthesis. He says that humans should emulate how plants emulate how plants do this and stay close to the earth. This superficiality is where the action is among the subtle energies of thin membranes in the retina, thin membrane of the troposphere, where life is sustained on a rock that has the effective density of glass. Thank you.
Yes, take a breath and questions. Oh, great.
What exactly sparked this interest in the eye and whatnot?
Oh, well, like I said, with Earth Sound Earth Signal, I didn't want to get into the body because the energies there just got way too complex. And I looked into the, and I wanted to sort of follow up from going from sound to sound is one energy among others. And in Earth Sound, Earth Signal, it was a looking at the larger trade between sound as in mechanics, acoustics mechanics, and electromagnetism. So, but yeah, I started looking into the body, and it was just, it gets very, very complicated in there. So again, I'd done the eye. Well, in energies in the arts, I tried to open it up to all energies. And now I'm trying to figure out methods to figure out what has been opened up. And the eye being one of the major senses, and, you know, for where the sound studies, and, you know, in the 90s, the eye was getting a bad rap. I thought I'd go back and give it a chance, give it a second chance. And I mean, I don't know if people, I mean, some of you may remember that in the 1990s, in the 80s and 90s, you know, just the film studies was just looking into the soundtrack. visual studies and study of visual culture was mute. There's this thing, art was called visual art. So in the, yeah, so there was a reason for an emphasis of sound, sort of a redress at that point. And now I think in a way, sound doesn't, is not fully capable of dealing with the sort of the energetic conditional situation that we find ourselves in. So I'm looking energetically at, still looking at energetically at the body, but energetically at a lot of, in a lot of other ways, theoretically and philosophically and historically. So that's, yeah, that's why the eye, and also it's good. It was nice being invited to this and having to do with the senses, because it gave me an opportunity to look more closely at the eye.
Okay, I see.
Okay. Raivo, would you like to ask the question, Douglas?
There is a question in the chat.
Yes, Raivo, maybe you yourself would like to ask.
Yes, naturally, I can ask with voice as well. What do you think? Is there a correlation between this extramissive understanding of vision and animistic understanding of the world, that the world is populated by soul, that unliving or non-living objects are having their inner life? Or is it's just a very artificial question, I understand, but and you mentioned this extramissive theory of vision and the intramissive theory of vision. And what's very peculiar, that probably a lot of people even now think that the vision is happening because some light or some force is coming from our eyes and kind of touching or sensing objects around us, almost with the invisible hands. So can we say that these kind of people probably tend to believe that world is much more spiritual or lived by or alive, I mean, much more as people who are more educated or more kind of with scientific approach to the world? I don't know. I think.
Well, yeah, I don't think it has to do with education or a scientific approach, but and in fact, the one thing that sort of an energies approach enables is to look, give integrity to other cultures, along with a sort of a Western so rationalistic culture. This was at the, you can actually see this opening up within even somebody with a background in thermodynamics like Michel Serre or Isabelle Stengers. With, in fact, if you read Serre, the more he gets frustrated with the inaction, lack of understanding about destroying the earth through global warming, sort of the closer he gets to animism, to acknowledging the existence of animism. He has an essay on Virginia Woolf that goes in that direction, but Isabel Stengers is more explicit in that. So I don't think there's a big gulf. I think that with the theories of vision within the West, I mean, in antiquity, there's quite a variety of theories of vision, and very interesting to see how the Platonic extramission made its way or not through Neoplatonism and places like that. But I think those things have to be looked at sort of case by case basis, and not sort of from these big perches of particular presumptions from certain cultural traditions.
Thank you.
Okay, well, more questions coming in. I would like to make, yeah.
I have a question. Hi. If I understand correctly, what you said about the ear, which makes a sound to hear, and similarly the eye has this fire, which is both can be understood as means how we perceive things, or the perceptual self, but also the eye as a machinic thing which makes also these movements to see. And this in relation to the Icarus story, that maybe the sun is both coming to Icarus, but also Icarus to the sun. And I'm saying this around the idea that maybe these things meet. So the light meets with the eye, and the eye meets with the light, and somehow shown from understanding from sound, there is a how should I say, they meet in a way that they produce meaning, or harmonically, let's say. They yes.
Well, that's, yeah, no, within the within autoacoustics, there's actually a mechanism, a cell in the outer hair cells, that when the sound comes in within a microsecond, there's an electromotive response. So you have the idea of sound coming in the ear with the inner hair cells opening up ion channels to nerve impulses to the brain, but within there's actually an outer hair cell that is sort of has this motor protein called Prestin, Prestin, that is named after presto in the musical tempo, because it's so quick. It's a micro measured in microseconds, but that produces, when sound comes in, that physiologically produces these vibrational waves within the cochlear fluid that increase, is part of what's called cochlear amplification, and enables pitch discrimination. So when I was saying that I was essentially looking for a return like a return transduction, because this is sound that sort of elicits an electromotive response. You can see videos on YouTube of one of these cells from a hamster that's isolated dancing to an Elvis song. So it actually expands and moves, and this in a group of them will sort of create this fluid dynamics within the cochlea to enable these things. So when I was saying the sound produced by the ear, it's actually a physical mechanism. Before the 1990s, before they put a little microphone in the ear of infants, they had to sort of wait to figure out whether they were deaf or not. At that point, they could put a microphone, and if there wasn't sort of a sound being returned, then they knew that the cochlea was not healthy, and there would be some hearing problems. But so that mechanism is actually physiological. So I was looking for that in the eye, and the only thing I could find was of the sun coming in and then going back out in the body is the body glimmer. So that there's a little delay there, as it comes in and goes out. So, but there's, and that sort of the emission of photons from the body happens just within the biochemical free radicals. This is getting on the edge, but the thing that you said about the sort of the movement of the eye is very interesting, because that's what one of the things that I think sort of an energetic, amplifying energy within certain systems of thought can do is, if you look at Gregory Bateson's Information is the Difference That Makes a Difference, he actually, at one point, it's first of all, that whole discussion, if you look at it, is sort of made in opposition to energy. There's not much matter within that discussion, or within the matter, energy, information. His discussion is sort of energy and information, but energy actually plays a predominant role in that. But more specifically, in this one place, he talks about a gecko in Hawaii, a sort of lizard, and he's watching this gecko, and a moth comes down and lands next to the gecko, but the gecko can't see it unless the moth starts moving again, and then it'll eat it. But Bateson is saying, well, we have these saccades. It's sort of like an English word, almost like a cascade, but a saccade is, instead of flowing down, it sort of moves back and forth. So the human eye has this sort of quickly shimmering, quick displacements that it's not really oscillation, because it sort of goes all over the place. That creates the difference through this thing he calls reafference. So there's a whole thing of eyes and energies to be had in Gregory Bateson's thought, in his development of the idea of information. So that's sort of more on the theoretical sense, but I think once you start looking at matter, energy, and information, and bring the energy forth and look at all these systems, there's the other big part where this happens is Henri Lefebvre's notion of rhythm analysis that he got from Bachelard originally. But there's a book now within his development of rhythm analysis, the energy and time is at the hub of his notion of rhythm. And somebody, I think it's Gordon Walker, has just come out with a book recently, very interesting on energy and rhythm analysis, where energy is more the fossil fuels, but looks at sort of urban geography in terms of rhythms within getting closer to relating sort of energy with rhythm. Now, in the talk where I said that there's this sort of idealized notion of natural cycles, diurnal cycles and seasonal cycles. So that's in Henri Lefebvre. So it's an idealized notion that has broken down, at least in the seasonal sense, because we get different seasons at any time of the year now, and exaggerated seasons, and but so what I was toying with the sense that they're in the circadian, because it has to do with the rotation of the Earth and the tilt, that it might be sort of the only pure nature left. But even that is a goner because of the global or the polar melting of the polar caps and the redistribution of the weight of water. There's actually now detectable a anthropogenic wobble in the on the axis of the Earth, sort of a wobble that has been caused by fossil fuel use, and in fact the weight of being lifted from the crust. There's now the anthropogenic change is structuring the crust of the Earth differently, the plates of the Earth differently now as well.
Thank you.
Okay. More questions? I can read one. So there is a question from Heather. She's in a bus.
Hi, Heather.
That's on a ferry. Okay, in the middle of the lagoon. So, so she's asking.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's. I would. Yeah, Bergson fits in, and again, you know, I want to look at Whitehead, but I mean, there's a lot of people that fit into this, and only so many hours in the day. But my interest now is, I mean, my collaboration with Pia van Gelder is called the Energies Artists Say. It has a version that's going in the handbook, one of those, you know, Rutledge handbooks of energy humanities, but it's also going to be a book that we're putting together of artists and scholars. But the main premise of the energy humanities one is that energy humanities has been formed almost entirely, effectively, as fossil fuels. I mean, energies in the sense of sources and systems of fuel and power generation, and that for the discussion of the arts and humanities, it can't be so equated with that. And in fact, that particular notion of energy, artists didn't start saying that until the 1970s, after the Santa Barbara oil spill and after the OPEC so-called energy crisis, the oil embargo. So by focusing on what artists say and have said historically, it's a way to get into this actually more complex notion of energies that so there I'm sort of so what I'm saying is I think there's more having artists say these things is actually sort of a hermeneutic method that might bring more accuracy into a more the culture, what I said is the cultural dynamic realm, and in its relationship to the to either sort of the physical notion of energy or the fossil fuel and their alternatives notion of energy. I think it's sort of a more complex question, and I think that the philosophers can do it. Right now, Michael Martyr is about the only philosopher that has decided to address energy directly, but within these, definitely the history, there's many more.
Okay, thank you. Julian, question, can you ask yourself?
Yes, can you hear me okay? I don't know if this microphone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fine.
You talked a bit about partridges at the end of your talk, and it just struck me that in Australia you have these bowerbirds that collect blue objects for their nests, and I wondered if you knew if that was in any way related to 479 nanometer
That's a really
of Solarception.
No, that's a
It's
no,
a kind of like you know,
I'm looking into this tomorrow.
Avian aesthetics.
No, that's yeah, no, that's a good one. The bowerbirds are, you know, in the Blue Mountains, and the males sort of make these, you know, sort of palaces out of bits of blue, and so that's what Julian is talking about, and they have this predilection for blue, but I've not looked into that, but but I think there might be some there.
Yeah, Julian?
Yeah, also,
No, we
there
didn't.
was one other thing which was just a comment really. I was talking to this professor of zoology, Mike Paulin, who studies the evolution of perception. And this couple of years ago, but he was talking about how the DNA in rods and cones is actually related to the philia in algal mats, and you can trace a direct descendance from seabed algal mats to the retina through DNA. And it's just a comment really. I don't really know what to say about it, but it just struck me when you were talking about the blue of the ocean and perception that there could be some kind of link between the.
Well, I made passing mention to that in the idea of the circadian, equating it with sort of the sense of time, like doesn't leave open the opportunities for what I call the pocketing of the environment. If you look at the evolution of the eye, it's really quite amazing. It came from light sensitive cells, generally vitamin A and light sensitive cells, but then those light sensitivity sort of got more and more complex, and within mammals it sort of got pulled in into the eye, and it has to do with light differentiation within environments, and especially in the Cambrian, when you get more sort of light, not just environment, but predators and being eating and being eaten, sort of heads towards this complexity of the pocketing of these functions. So it was really interesting that sort of within the eye, all of a sudden there was a non-imaging light sensitivity, which was supposed to be within the terms of the evolution was supposed to be more primitive, that this was actually not found in the eye until isolated until something like 2003. But the opsin within that melanopsin, there's actually an essay that was one of the only ones that I started glazing over. I sort of knew I'd gotten too far. Was the evolution of opsins, sort of the chemistries involved within photoreception. So these like the ones that you're talking about, but also melanopsin. So there's the evolution is not just within. It's evolutionary science is quite amazing, and it impinges upon these things as well.
Thank you.
I can send you the essay. I can send you the essay on the evolution of opsins.
I'll see how I get on.
Okay.
Yeah, no, just for
Okay.
light reading.
Okay, thank you. So there is a question from Paula.
Hi, Douglas. Thanks so much for your presentation. Incredibly fascinating. I have a question from the beginning, because you were mentioning the difference between philosophers and artists, how it was, I think it was related to the poetics, how the artist being able to capture the poetic impact in the number of data that one can actually collect and convey. So the question is, because I missed, if you could repeat the specificity in how you express it.
Oh, I'm not sure where you came in, but I was, yeah, I think there's this thing about scientific laws and artistic licenses that, there's speeding limits, but you have a driver's license and you can sort of go over the speeding limit if you're an artist. But no, I think I was trying to show how with the philosophers, Michel Serres and Gaston Bachelard, that where Gaston Bachelard sort of separated the classical elements for his poetics, and for this philosophy of science, he kept the matter, he kept modern physics, or he kept physics, and they were sort of kept apart. It's a little, I mean, it's actually a little more complicated than that. There's parts where in Bachelard where they go together, but in general, they're sort of held apart. Whereas with Michel Serres, he brings them together, so he'll look at the, he gets sort of impatient with people just talking about the development of thermodynamics in a scientific sense without talking about Turner, the painter Turner, so or Emile Zola, I mean, in the essay that I referred to, I think there's, well, in Hermes, he talks about, he's more concentrated on that relationship. So, I mean,
It was exactly, no, because you made a conclusion. I was actually paying attention. It's just that the presentation switched. But you really literally made a conclusion speaking about the relation between Serres and Bachelard, in which it sounded, that's why I wanted to accurately put it down, not to misquote. It sounded like one philosopher was not taking account the poetic that as artists do, and by default, it was eliminating very important information and data to drive conclusions. It sounded something like I mean, this is my interpretation. So that's why I wanted that if you could give me a bit the specific of what you said, so that there is no interpretation.
Well, Rasa, this is being recorded, right? So it may be that, yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know. Yeah, where I might have said that succinctly, yeah, but without sort of starting to read my paper over again, but yeah, I mean, in a lot of the discussion was on sort of art and science and the relationship and how they're not sort of they're not mutually exclusive, and yeah, I'm not so sure. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's fine. And I really thank you for questions. And I think our time is getting late, and I would like to kind of summarize from also what I would like to say, and maybe ask just this one short last question, just to make it more clear this point. Because as you mentioned, 15 years ago, you gave a talk on waves. I remember this conference for us, it was really like we thought we have discovered something amazing, or this electromagnetic spectrum, and visual part is just this very tiny one, and everything else invisible is just even much more exciting. So for many years, like in parallel, like you did with the sound art, we also were trying to find all this invisible, and this is these invisible parts, so how they are used in arts particularly. And from today's perspective, and especially from the sensorium or sense perspective, actually nearly these waves, electromagnetic spectrum, like how it's usually communicated, seems even much more simple than because as soon as we go to these senses and you start to explain I from this perspective, this is really new. It's exactly like Sue said, you are proposing new sense. Yeah, because we are always thinking that it's a visual, definitely this is a spectrum, it's a mechanical maybe way how the brain is developing images. But yeah, I is also a sense, and probably if we put it in this way, so we can reveal somehow more also approaches how to transform it into something, I don't know, into multi-sensory artwork, let's say, for example. So yeah, what could be your conclusion for saying this, especially not so much maybe from theory? Let's go back to practice and artists. So what you would suggest in terms of mediums or methods? So what you think or what you have seen would be really worth to explore for artists?
Well, I actually have an ethic of not telling artists what to do. You can ask my PhD students. They get a little, I will talk about the history and theory, but when it comes to telling artists what to do, I have an ethic against it. I mean, I'd spend a lot of time trying to figure out what artists do. Earth Sound, Earth Signal was trying to figure out what a few works by my teacher, Alvin Lucier, and a few works by my friend, Joyce Hinterding. And that took 10 years to write, to research and write that book. So but I thought that there's a way to, first of all, identify this sense and give it more integrity. And since it's, and also to try to relate it to prediction technology, to Daedalus's nephew that stayed close to the Earth. I think, again, it's within that prediction technology, you know, it's similar to what Michael Martyr says about the superficiality in a positive sense, the superficiality of the energetic relationship of plants to the sun, the sort of the immediacy. And so I think there's a way to think, you know, technologically and energetically in a way that's, I mean, it's sort of more than biomimicry, but there are sort of approaches and technologies that I think can arise out of those models. And you know, and I think probably there's a lot of things that arise out of a given set of models, sensory models that could be developed in other ways.
Okay, thank you, Douglas, and thanks for a very inspiring talk. Yes, right, artists don't need much advice what to do, but they definitely need these inspirational lectures as yours. So thank you so much for bringing all this rich material together and presenting it in today's PostSensorium conference. Okay, thank you. Douglas.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, and bye. And now we make 5 minutes really short break just to go to, so you can decide which room to go. We now split in 2 breakout rooms. Room A goes for intelligent ecosystems and room B goes for sensory perception and sonic immersions.